Previously on the Uff Da Files.
The 60s, that groovy era of peace, love, and the ominous specter of nuclear annihilation following the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was also the decade of the space race, when the US and USSR pitted their top minds and large proportions of their national budgets to prove who had the biggest rocket. Meanwhile, UFOs appeared to take a keen interest in our species' first tentative steps into space, loitering around military installations, and playing cat and mouse with fighter jets with a kind of neener, boo-boo attitude that left our guys red-faced and scrambling for rational explanations like swamp gas. Even far-flung human outposts like Minnesota weren't spared these alien incursions, with a fairly steady stream of reports throughout the 60s, ranging from a disk discerned in broad daylight over Lake Superior in 1961 to a close encounter of the proverbial third kind that occurred outside of Winstead, a small town west of the Twin Cities. As reported in the M-Files, this extraordinary encounter occurred on January 24, 1967. A local fellow was on his way into town early one morning when his truck mysteriously stalled. It was a Chevy. He hopped out and opened the hood when suddenly an intense light approached from the left and something landed on the road in front of him. He described the thing with curious specificity as 27 feet in diameter and 11 yards high, standing on 3 legs. Not surprisingly, the guy jumped back in the truck and locked his doors, then watched as an elevator descended from the craft. A figure exited, dressed in blue coveralls and with something like a fishbowl on its head. The creature appeared to check something on its ship, the equivalent of popping the hood, I guess, then briskly got back in the saucer and took off. One can hardly blame him for his abrupt departure. The average temperature on January 24th in Minneapolis is a brisk 20 degrees, and there's no indication the alien was wearing his thermal overalls. Plus, you know the inside of this fishbowl had to have gotten pretty fogged up. It's a pity, though, because the human and ET could have bonded over the all-too-familiar problem of having an unreliable vehicle break down out in the Tules without a service station for miles. The height of 1960s UFO activity in Minnesota occurred smack dab in the middle of the decade, which just so happens to be when I made my own landing on the planet. In fact, during the fall of 1965, there was a spate of spacecraft sightings that coincided pretty closely with my own appearance. Let's examine the facts. The autumnal extraterrestrial tick-up began on August 3, 1965, when what were described as nocturnal lights were spotted over Lake Minnetonka, Shorewood, Blaine, Golden Valley, and St. Anthony. These sightings were lights only, no discernible shape, no sound, and no exhaust. That is, no nocturnal emissions. But the next day, up north in Duluth, the skies were a-getting busy. As reported in the August 4, 1965 Duluth News-Tribune, boy spots buzzing red ball. Already in bed, 8-year-old Dennis Johnson of Duluth suddenly bolted upright at the sound of a loud buzzing.
I went to the window and saw a red bat-like thing over the neighbor's house. The object made a whirring sound and headed towards Superior Street. On the back of the red ball was a flap-like tail that was silver and glowed.
He called for his father to look out the family's front window. Dad told reporters he didn't see anything, but he heard a car with a different kind of muffler, like a supersonic interstellar warp drive muffler pops. August 6, 1965. A man called Coast Guard officials just after midnight to report seeing a UFO splash into Lake Superior near the former interstate bridge. The craft was underwater, the man said. He could see it. He offered to take authorities to the exact spot, and he did. And he shouted,
"There it is!"
as he pointed to a spot offshore.
He's the only one that saw anything,
a Coast Guard spokesman said. Or maybe you just need to open your eyes, sailor. August 7th, 1965. Thousands of Duluthians watched dumbfounded as Air Force planes chased unidentified flying objects over Lake Superior. United Press International reported that up to 10 UFOs flew in a V formation. The UFOs were tracked by U.S. Air Force and Royal Canadian Air Force radar, moving at 9,000 miles per hour, at altitudes ranging from 5,200 feet to 17,000 feet, and the things absolutely smoked the air aces pursuing them. UFO historians, yep, also a real thing, claim that the next morning news of the UFOs and of the Air Force's unsuccessful chase were the banner headline on page 1 of the Duluth News-Tribune. Extra, extra, read all about it. Thousands see flying objects. Jets chase UFOs over Duluth area. Extra, extra. However, it turns out you can't read all about it because it seems that front page of the News-Tribune is now missing from the microfilm archives not only in the newspaper's own morgue, but in the main Duluth Public Library and the library at the University of Minnesota Duluth. According to a 2002 article in that very paper, Duluth video producer Don Hansen searched for the front page back in 1987. From what I can gather, this was a major sighting, but it appears to have been expunged from the record, Hansen told reporter Chuck Frederick. That page is gone from every single source I could think of. They were thorough, whoever they are. University of Minnesota Duluth's then business reference librarian Jim Valita was even more direct. The men in black are probably involved here. You don't say. These sorts of sightings occurred around the state all through that fall, from a wedge-shaped UFO over St. George in October to a flurry of sightings in central Minnesota on November 16th over Cyrus, Detroit Lakes, Herman, Erskine, and Fort Ripley. But the high point of this season of saucers came on October 23rd in a town not 20 miles from my own so-called birthplace, and it's been described by UFOologists, yes, that's a thing, as one of the most unusual encounters ever. Let me set the stage for this saga as detailed in the M-Files. It's early Saturday evening, about 7:15 in rural central Minnesota. By this time of year, it's already dark by 7 o'clock, so the lights of the small town of Long Prairie, population about 2,400, are a bright oasis on the flat landscape. But local KEYL radio DJ James Townsend, just 19 years old, is still about 4 miles from town, too far to see the glow of the city. He was driving west on Highway 27, coming from Little Falls. It was a straight shot across the flat land, except for one gradual curve slightly to the south, just before the town of Long Prairie would come into view. But just as he reached the curve, the engine of James's 1956 model car suddenly stalled. The radio quit, and the headlights went out. As the car coasted to a stop, James got a clue about what may have caused the malfunction. There, ahead of him, in the middle of the highway, stood a spaceship. It was a gleaming silver tower, a pointed pillar with 3 fins, like the classic rocket ships of 1950s creature features. James estimated it was 30 to 40 feet high and about 10 feet around. So what do you do when you're stalled on a lonely highway at night with an alien spaceship blocking the road ahead of you?
My first thought was to knock it over with the car so I could have some evidence.
Good deal. Except your car crapped out, remember? Nevertheless, James tried to start the jalopy to put his bold plan into action. No dice. But the resourceful teen quickly came up with Plan B.
I thought I could tip the rocket, try and block the center of gravity and topple it over so I can have some evidence, right there in black and white.
Assuming this 40-foot-tall rocket was made of papier-mâché, that could definitely work. So James gets out of his car and starts toward the rocket. But then,
When I got to the front of my car, 3 creatures that looked like individual tin cans on tripods and were 6 inches tall came from behind the rocket. They didn't have any eyes that I could see, but I knew they were looking at me. I stopped. I didn't have any desire to get any closer.
They were brown or black, cylindrical in shape, had very thin arms and walked on 2 fins. The objects moved with a side-to-side wobble. When they stopped, a 3rd fin came down from the object's rears.
like a training wheel, for cute. Our man James beat a hasty retreat from the advancing candroids.
I was looking at them, and I was quite fascinated with what I saw. You might ask why, since I was willing to go up to them before, I did not go up to them now. I used what I hoped was common sense. I felt that if they could stop my car, they could surely do something worse to me, and I wanted to live.
James reports that he stared down the droids for about 3 minutes. Then they waddled back into the rocket, which commenced to hum, blasted off forthwith. As the rocket accelerated out of sight, Jimbo's jalopy fired up on its own. The DJ sped into Long Prairie at 90 miles an hour to report his unique experience to the local constabulary.
I was sure of 2 things. The rocket was a spaceship of some kind, and the 3 objects that came out of it were creatures like nothing in the animal world I've ever seen. They are definitely not people as I know them.
Now, you may be thinking that this is the hokiest tall tale you've ever heard. But according to the M-Files, raccoon hunters in the area that night also reported seeing a strange light. Now, I have lived here more than half a century and have never heard of people raccoon hunting in this area in my life. Whatever. It's said the rocket circled a nearby farm a few times, too. Seems like the sort of thing that might attract a little more attention. The local sheriff took Jim's report seriously enough to visit the sighting site the next morning, where he discovered telltale evidence of interplanetary technology. 3 parallel streaks of oily water on the pavement.
I don't know what they were.
The sheriff told reporters.
I've looked at a lot of roads, and I never saw anything like it before.
DJ Jim was so convinced of the importance of his experience that he formally reported it to the Air Force, telling the government's official UFO investigating body,
I know that this is quite a wild story, but if you don't believe me, well, that's your tough luck.
Strangely, Project Blue Book declined to take on the case. However, J. Allen Hynek, world-famous UFO investigator, interviewed Jim and was assured by the sheriff that Jim Townsend, like all the community's wholesome teens, was a sober, truthful Christian boy. Well, that's good enough for me. Because I am a serious investigator, I recently took a drive over to Long Prairie and identified the spot where the little round rocketeers landed. And do you know what I discovered? Nothing. No historical marker, no self-led tour, no picnic park with a slide shaped like a rocket ship, not even a souvenir stand with adorable tin can creature plushies and commemorative t-shirts. I had to make this one myself. Hey, Long Prairie Chamber of Commerce, you're missing the boat here. Or the rocket ship.
So what is the meaning of this curious incident? Now, I'm not saying that the fact that it happened within days of her birth, a scant few miles away, in any way proves that she is actually from up there. But consider that she is herself relatively round, wobbles when she walks, and occasionally leaves greasy streaks behind. Proof positive of her alien DNA? Alien hybrid biotheorists say it's possible.
Next time on the Uff Da Files.